This is Long Way to the Top, and I'm your host, Shane Bryan. In the words of the immortal AC/DC, it is harder than it looks. These interviews will give you a glimpse into the lives of the artists that we've sung along with, danced and rocked out to. Some go deep into their past and others celebrate their recent releases. But all of them show that regardless of who you are, it's always a long way to the top. In 2019, Paul Mitchell began working on an album with a bunch of musicians, and then COVID hit and lockdowns happened around the world. What was a planned album turned into some collaborations, some humorous and some serious. They gained the attention of musician management guru Ian Grant, who suggested a project to help musicians who were struggling due to the lockdowns. That was the beginning of what would ultimately lead to a project put together by the makeshift band of artists that were aptly called Kindred Spirit. Several songs later, the focus was shifted to Parkinson's disease, from which Ian was and is still a sufferer. In 2023, the collaboration was called Think Loud, and it brought together a who's who of industry greats. And I'm honoured to have producer Paul Mitchell on today's episode of Long Way to the Top. How are you, mate?
Hi, Shane.
Round two, I have to say, you know, we've already done this interview, and we did it, and just things just didn't work. So, you know, obviously there were some things that we needed to really discuss in that we didn't get around to last time.
Gremlins.
Yeah, exactly.
Techie gremlins interfering with our fantastic interview.
You'd think though, because you're so used to, you know, doing things over, you know, online now, that all of the gremlins would have been ironed out. I'm not saying it was your fault either.
No, well, you know, I mean, it's you do. We all now know how to use all these things. We didn't know what Microsoft Teams or Zoom was before now, and we all know what it is now. Even my mum used to know what Zoom was. But you still see people at the beginning of a Zoom call, and you're going, I can't hear you.
Yeah, you're on mute.
I can see you. But still, no, you're right. But still, anyway, it's great to talk to you.
And it's a funny thing because, like, you know, what we're talking about now and being online. 2019, we didn't really know how to do online music sharing and things like that. And we've really come a long way over the last 4 years.
100%. I mean, I've spent a lot of my life doing work for corporations where I was, where I was a sort of a consultant, and that was often frowned upon because you were a consultant. You would work at your own office and you'd come into the main office on occasion, and people would look down their nose at you as if you were a part timer. And you wind forward a few years, and now sitting at home working in your shorts with a video link up is completely fine. And you know, the world's changed completely in a lot of ways. But you're absolutely right. 2019, we didn't know anything about any of this technology, and the sales of headphones and microphones went through the roof.
Yeah, wow. I wish I had have been able to foresee that. You know, I guess looking at it from a musician standpoint, musicians traditionally, and I say traditionally, nearly 100%, all have been either going into a studio and laying down their tracks, and then someone else would go in and lay down their tracks, or they would all get together and record or perform all face to face. So when lockdown suddenly happened, and really this is the start of the whole Kindred Spirit story, when lockdown happened, suddenly we were left standing there going, what do we do now?
Yeah, we were. You're right. I mean, interestingly, you should make the comparison between, you know, remote recording, home recording, and studio recording. Obviously, digital technology now has been around for a while. It's not, you know, being able to record and use a computer instead of a multi-track machine. That's not as new as some might think. But there are still a lot of musicians who can't get their heads around it or don't have the wherewithal to get it together because they're so used to working with producers or studios or whatever. But it's interesting because it's actually become a more rare thing to all get in the studio and work together. I actually did an album in 2014 and another one in 2015 with a jazz quartet of some absolute renowned players, Danny Thompson, Jim Mullen, to name a few. And we were going to do a number of standards and some arrangements of some stuff that I'd done. And I was there, I was the vocalist. And these guys, we got together, and because they had the dots and they were all pros and they were able to work it through, and we had a studio that had a nice piano, we did it all in 6 hours. I'd booked them all for 8, and in 6 hours they're all looking at their watch going, well, have you got anything else to do, or can we go? So if you get the right guys together in a studio, you can just knock this stuff out and you mix it all afterwards.
Yes.
But the opposite is what you're talking about here is how you do that remotely. And the interesting thing was, as part of these projects evolved, we were actually having to look at, okay, it's all very well finding people that are willing participants in the programs, but then you have to ask the question, do you have a mic at home? Can you do this kind of stuff? Do you know how to operate? So a lot of what I did during that process was actually say to people, right, I'm going to send you a mic. I'm going to send you a set of headphones. I'm going to call you up on FaceTime and show you how to hook it up to your laptop. I'm going to remotely control your machine. So we had a lot of that. A lot of that happened.
And when I guess you were starting your projects and then the whole lockdowns sort of happened, did you at one point just think to yourself, well, that's the end of that?
I think the initial thought from everybody, and I remember the day that the government announced the lockdown, and I naively, I got a message from a friend of mine, a text from a friend of mine who at the time was a single mum with like a 17-year-old son who was just sort of finishing school. And she sent me a message the week, and she said, I think we're going into lockdown. And I thought, my immediate thought was, what, you mean you're going to stay at home with your son and just watch Netflix? And she said, no, there's going to be a government lockdown. And it hadn't even occurred to me that that's what was on the horizon. And I do remember the day that it happened and just sort of feeling, first of all, the isolation of it. And then once it started to unfold and you're sort of sitting there, you realize that the government made some provisions relatively quickly. But people were just sort of thinking, right, well, I'm stuck at home now. What am I going to do? And the format that we're now speaking on, like these video link ups and calls, became a very important part of communicating. And I think when we spoke before, I'd said to you that, I'd just sort of become newly living alone about a week before the lockdown. So all of a sudden I'd moved into a place. I'd started my business a few months before, which of course turned out to be a disaster, my audio business, only because of the fact that, I didn't expect lockdown to occur. But then I'm at home, I'm on my own, I'm locked in, and it's like, okay. And to be fair, people called up and said, see how you're doing and all of those things. But it was a very strange place to be catapulted to,
Yeah. And strange for, obviously for you, yes, it was because you just started the business. But thinking about from a musician perspective, no more concerts, no more band get-togethers. And people had to they started to become very creative. And I remember getting an email from a band that was called the Condors, and they were actually the backing band the backing group vocalists for Noel Gallagher's Flying Birds.
Right.
And they said, we've put together a whole bunch of songs and we recorded it all on Zoom. And my brain just went, what? How did this even happen? And suddenly it opened up.
It's crazy because the fact that you had two parts to that. You had musicians who were suddenly, if you need any kind of inspiration to write, sometimes if somebody said to you, right, I'm going to lock you in a room, you can't come out till you've written an album's worth of material, which is incidentally, that's the kind of tactic that Andrew Oldham had with the Stones when they first got together, go and write some hits. And if you're put in that position, you can become creative. You really can become creative. Yeah. So you've got a situation whereby, you've got a lot of creative people suddenly cannot interact with each other properly in the same room like they used to.
Yeah.
You've also got other musicians who, to be fair, there was an awful lot of musicians who relied on going up and down the country, playing folk clubs, stuff like that, and that was happening all over the world. And you suddenly take away, the paltry amount of money that those guys relied on, and you've got a very serious problem. But to be fair, you had a combination of some guys just, big artists, stars, who were forced to stay at home. And a lot of those guys did become very creative.
Yeah.
I wrote a lot during that time. I wrote some of my best material in 2019 and going into 2020.
Yeah.
And it's stuff that, because I was forced into a position to do it. And also you had stuff to write about.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you realize what it's like to be alone and you're not interacting and you're missing out and stuff like that.
All
so it was
by
a very
myself,
strange.
Yeah. Good on Eric Carmen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what started it for me.
And there we go. That's a nice little segue into that one. Yeah.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, I had three girls local to me. One was the landlady of the pub. The other one was an old neighbour, and the other one was a art curator who worked for the government locally. And basically, they were all single, and I was newly single, and they were my sort of guardian angels. They used to check in most days. And one evening we were on this House Party was the very first program that everybody was using before Zoom became the thing. There was this thing called House Party, which was a little bit of a toy thing, which sort of came and went quite quickly, but everybody was using that. And I remember being on that, and the landlady of the pub, Jude, she said, "What would be your lockdown song?" And I wanted to come up with something funny instantly, and I couldn't. And it wasn't until the next morning when I was showering, I thought, all by myself, Eric Carmen, what a great tune. And by the time I sort of washed and cleaned my teeth and got dressed, I'd sort of, in my head, I'd rewritten the first few verses. And that, that became what actually took that, what made that funnier or made it sort of spread a little bit quicker was the fact that one of my local mates had spoken to me, and he said, I only watch stuff on YouTube. Can you make a YouTube video of it rather than just, the recording? Because if you put so the little video I made, as you know yourself, if you use a mobile phone to record your video and it's standing up like that, what you get when you put it on a widescreen thing is you get a load of space at the side of the screen, right? You've got this little narrow bit. Well, that, of course, just lent itself to fill up that space with images that reflect what's going on in the song. Yeah. So that's exactly what I did. And the gift, the biggest gift of that was the fact that my favorite beer and my local pub sells loads of it. It's called Young's, and it's from the Wandsworth Brewery, the original Ram Brewery in Wandsworth in South London. And the first line of the original song by Eric Carmen says, "When I was young." And of course, I was able to change that to "When I had Youngs." So it was, "When I had Youngs, I never needed anyone." And it went on from there. And I made the little video, and it went out and it went viral. It's had a few thousand hits, and that's what started this process. Because our friend Ian Grant, who Ian was the one that picked up on that, and sort of thought, can we do this? And then the rest of that story was unfolded with Ian's Rolodex, really.
Yeah. So he basically had this idea of let's put a song together and let's link it up with a charity. And what better charity to go to than something that impacts the music industry.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, right at the very beginning of that process, I think we must have been just out of March and into April, and I think the Doobie Brothers had done something which was on TV, and it gave the impression that they were all playing live, and certainly to the uninitiated, that's what it looked like. Then the Stones did one, and then you could clearly see that Charlie Watts was, the drum crashes were not in time with his hands. It was all mine. But Ian, I said to Ian, it doesn't matter. I said, we can still, the technology is not there for everybody to synchronize globally, because there's always going to be a delay. You can't get away with that. That's always going to be the case. But we can certainly do some remote recording. So Ian's idea there was to do something, first of all, for a bit of fun to do that. And then we thought about the charities, and we did. It's interesting because when you work with charities, you think, when you put yourself forward, you think to yourself, oh, they're going to just bite my arm off because we're going to do something for them. But in reality, you don't always get the reception that you're hoping for from every charity you go to. We went to one of the mental health charities to start with, and we were actually given the cold shoulder. And I don't think there was anything disingenuous from them on their part. It's just the fact that they were overwhelmed. They have a lot to do anyway. So we, it took a bit of thinking through, but then help musicians is basically that's the trading name of the Musicians Benevolent Trust, which is a royal seal. That's something that the Queen was a patron of. And that as a charity was incredible for musicians, because in the very first week of lockdown, they gave £500 to over 17,000 musicians in the UK, which was incredible. And if you're a guy that's been working the folk clubs and you get, £150 a gig, somebody to suddenly send you a check for 500. So that became very quickly, our champion cause, because we were, that was it. We knew lots of people that affected. So as well as all the stars that we knew and all the stars that Ian had worked with in the past, there was also hundreds of people we knew that did just rely on, those smaller gigs. So that's why we chose that charity in the end.
And I think in Australia we had a very similar thing. It was called Music Cares. And I guess to a certain extent in Australia we were a little bit lucky, because the government stepped in and said, oh, well, we'll help support you. We've got JobKeeper, we've got JobSeeker. And so there was a period of time where a lot of these artists could support their roadies and help them with, to a certain extent. And then it all stopped and it became very difficult. So I think, no one expected that it was going to go on for as long as it did.
No, and I think if you, some of that early days of sitting at home, those first weeks, after I did that all by myself, it didn't take too long. Funnily enough, I'd done a cover of Hotel California and called it Hotel COVID-19. and at the time, I didn't set out to do that. It was literally sitting at home with a guitar, and I thought, it would just be a fun project to record it at home, just to do all the guitar parts and learn all the guitar parts, which is how it started, which is what I did. So, you can download a MIDI track, which will basically play the bass and all the drum parts for you. And then you just play the guitar parts over and over and over. And then I got that finished. That was quite satisfying. And then it came to me. I thought, well, if I could make a spoof of this and just call it Hotel COVID-19. Well, I made reference in the lyrics of that when I changed the lyrics from the original Don Henley lyrics. One of the lines I said was a joke, and it said, lockdown until September, maybe. That's what I was thinking, and that was in April. Well, of course, we went way past that. We went way into the future on that. So I don't think anybody could foresee what was going to occur. And as you say, it wasn't just affecting us in the UK. It was obviously the US and Australia, and the Kiwis had a different idea at the time, though, I think, didn't they?
They did, yeah.
They did something.
Yeah, they did something. Of course, Melbourne, if you followed, along at home, Melbourne was the most locked down city in the world. And I think it was locked down for well over 18 months, which is just crazy. Nuts. It's crazy, yeah.
What does it do to people? But anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, Ian, of course, Ian opened his Rolodex and sort of started thinking about people we could get together with. And that, for me, I mean, I knew a lot of these people, but to be fair, I'd not worked professionally with most of them. But I was sort of thrown into the process, and I cut my teeth, as it were, in the last 3 or 4 years doing some of these projects. It's been great. Before that, I was doing stuff for myself. I was performing live. But it's been a long time since I would say I was a pro musician, and I certainly haven't made any money out of selling records, although I've made a few, which speaks for probably about 85% of the musicians in the world.
It's pretty much the same now for everyone, yeah.
That's same for everyone. But the process was great, because Ian just said we'd speak every day, and then he would sort of say, right, well, I'm going to phone up Josh, and then we'll get on a call with Josh Phillips. And Josh I did know before, but not as well as I do now. And then we get Glenn Matlock, and then we get Arthur Brown, and then we get, so basically Ian was going through his list of people that we could do something with, and then I was trying to fit it all in. And then we had to choose what track to do, etc. And to start with, we were worried about publisher and royalties. And that very first project, we actually chose, at my suggestion, we chose House of the Rising Sun, because I happened to know from doing a swing version of it 5 years before that nobody owned the publishing rights to it, which is kind of crazy to think that. But nobody actually owns that. So we were able to do that without having to give anybody a publishing royalty.
Yeah.
And off we went, and we put that little band together.
And interesting too, because, House of the Rising Sun's got such a big, long history to it, In fact, I was talking with the Animals and John Steele, who's the drummer, and he opened up and said that it was that song that really changed the direction for Bob Dylan from acoustic to electric. And, Bob Dylan stopped on the side of the road and said, listening to the song, got out of the car and just went, "Oh my God, that's it. I'm going to start using electric guitar." So it was a song that was very much a catalyst for change. So for you to choose that song as the first song in this whole world of change was ironic in itself.
Yeah, 100%. And I think also when we went through that process, I mean, I don't know if you've heard it, but I mean, the combination of who we had on that. So, that whole process, when you're recording it remotely, the first thing you do is you agree a tempo and you get a click track together, and the click track was there with me playing acoustic guitar. That's how it started.
Yeah.
Then Josh put on some Hammond organ. We sent it over to a buddy of ours called Turl Bryant. Turl's currently on tour with the Martin Barr band. Martin Barr used to be the guitar player in Jethro Tull. Turl put his drums together, his drum track there. Fortunately, he had all his kit at home mic'd up, so he was able to do it, and he was able to film himself doing it. It was all very slick. Then Tony Butler from Big Country put the bass on, and then we had Alan Clayton from the Dirty Strangers put some guitar on, interestingly using Keith Richards' 1972 Gibson acoustic, which was really cool, that Keith had given Alan. And then I played electric guitar as well, and then we had John Altman played saxophone. The John is a mighty arranger and sax player.
Yeah.
I mean, John knows everybody on the planet, it seems, from movie stars to musicians, TV people. So he was involved, which was really cool. And then, of course, we had Arthur Brown singing it. And Dave Pegg also played mandolin. Arthur Brown was in lockdown with his partner and manager, Claire. And they really wanted to do it, but didn't have a clue, how are we going to do this?
Yes.
So I said, well, do you have a laptop? Well, we've got it's a bit old and it doesn't work very well. Okay. And the whole process then was, okay, let me get you a little MacBook. I'll find that. I'll load all the software on it at home.
Yeah.
I'll send it to you by courier with some headphones and a microphone, and then we'll do it. So that whole thing with Arthur was all done remotely. I was controlling their machine from my place.
Yeah.
And that really was that I was proud of us doing that. That whole thing worked out great. And the track itself was brilliant. And then the attention to detail with the end of that, which is a really nice thing. And anybody that goes and watches this on YouTube, you'll see some artwork at the beginning. And the House of the Rising Sun is a real place. It is in New Orleans. It's still there. And we managed to get a photograph of the corner of the street where it originally was. Now, the photograph was taken by a local photographer in New Orleans called Claire Bangser, and we managed to get hold of her. I managed to track her down, get her permission to use the image, and then Alan Clayton's son, Paul, did the design. And then at the very beginning of the whole thing, we put this little sound of thunderstorm and rain, and then going to sort of birds tweeting and the sun clearing up to sort of, it was basically supposed to sort of, things are bad, but they're going to get better kind of thing. And it's going to, so it was a really cool thing to do. And we sat back for a while, and, obviously once it was done, we had to release it. That's had over 45,000 plays now on YouTube.
Wow.
But the amount of money it's raised is a different thing.
Yeah, because people just play and they don't. This is where you need that. We spoke about this at length last time we spoke. You need to have that physical, be it vinyl or CD or whatever, because the digital just can't raise the funds.
No, well, it's the royalty rates that you get are, when I get this, and I get the statements from our distribution hub that we use.
Yeah.
And obviously, when you release something like this nowadays, anybody can do it. It's not difficult. You sign up for $120 a year, you get yourself onto the platform, and then they take care of all the publishing, all the royalties, they take care of all of that kind of stuff. And then you just have a list of tick boxes. Where do you want it to be? You want it on YouTube? Tick here. You want it on Apple Music? Tick here. You want it on Amazon? Tick here. And it's all there, right? And the dilemma we had with that very first one, and it was a dilemma because Ian and I did, I wouldn't say it was heated exchanges, but we had a long process. We talked about this. Was, do we make it just paid for downloads only, and therefore the people that want it pay 99 cents to get it, and we make 60 cents for the charity? Or do we put it everywhere so that everybody gets a chance to hear it in an attempt to promote the giving part of it, getting people to donate? And of course, if you do the latter, we got, as I said, 40,000 hits on YouTube for that video, and loads of fantastic, messages from people and quotes. But if I told you that it's made less than $250, and that's since 2020.
Wow. That's heartbreaking,
right? It is. And then when you look at the royalty rate for YouTube, it's a play gets you 0.000. There's about 7 zeros before you get to 1.
Wow.
So and funnily enough, during that first lockdown period, I also did some stuff for other artists, including Fairport Convention, because they couldn't do their festival that summer. Now I said to them, look, my advice would be, just make it download. The people that are your fans will just, download it. Now, in fairness, we only had about 160 or 170 people out of their fan base that bothered to go on and pay for it and download it to iTunes. Now, to be honest, there must have been an awful lot of them who didn't know how to do that, right? There's a lot of them are older who had to get their kids to help them, kind of thing. But that made about 3 times as much from only plays that were in the hundreds. So it's very difficult nowadays to monetize any of this stuff.
And so fast forwarding, then why did you then do another one and another one? I mean, if you knew that was the case.
Well, interestingly, as you know, you've spoken to Ian yourself. Ian's a bit of an enigma. I mean, he was in the music industry, most of his life promoting and then managing. He's an incredible man, and as we also touched on. Ian's also been suffering from Parkinson's for the last number of years. So a lot of the process that I was going through with him was, we were speaking regularly about his condition and his health and how he was, which is when came up these therapy sessions that he was talking about. But I could also see that this had energized him. This first project had energized him and given him something to do. And it took him back to what he used to do, being at the front of it, making it happen, getting involved in the PR.
Yeah.
And like all rock and roll managers, like they should be, Ian's like a dog with a bone when he gets going. So he was driving it. So that's why we did the second one, was purely simply because it was he who came. He said to me, let's do another. And to be fair, he wasn't involved. The second one I did actually was the Fairport Convention one, and that came about because they asked me to do that. Yes. That didn't involve Ian so much, although he was watching over my shoulder to see that one come to fruition. And then it got to the end of the year, and that's when Ian, we'd basically done all the work to promote House of the Rising Sun. Well, let's do another one. And then we had the call about, what should it be? And I think they just announced the vaccine had just been approved for use coming out of 2020. So I said, oh, well, everything's going to be all right now. And then we were like, oh yeah, that's it. All right now. Let's do All Right Now by Free. Yeah. Which is that's the one we did. And then and Ian sort of said, we could use the same band, or we could add some people we haven't used before. And I said, well, let's talk to some other people, Yes. Now Arthur was still basically a shoo-in, because Arthur will sing and can sing anything. So it's like, we'll have Arthur. And then we had Chris Spedding, he played guitar on that. Clem Burke played drums, and Glenn Matlock played the bass on that one. It was great fun. And we did that again in exactly the same way. Everybody did their bits. Clem did his drums in a studio that he got use of in LA. And again, it was a little bit sort of lockdown was, ish. If you were a pro, you had a reason. He was allowed to go to the studio, but they were all masked up and all of that kind of stuff. And of course, things like bass and guitar, you can pretty much record from home. And all my prerequisite was, can you record it? Can you send me the stems, the files that you recorded? And can you video yourself so that we can use the content? Yes. And that was how it basically came together. Yes. That was it.
And Marcy Levy, or Marcella Detroit, she was involved with that one as well?
No, Marcy came in on the third one, which was, that was when we were going into 21. We'd got on the radar of a few people with what it was we were doing. And of course, Ian's profile, Ian knows everybody, he knows a lot of people. And there'd been a project that was going on with a producer, a famous producer, a guy called Steve Brown. And Steve was working with these guys on what was going to be called an Angels of the Nation. Right. So a guy called Paul Gilly and his son James they were in the hospitality industry, and they realized that there was all these people that were basically national health workers who were succumbing to COVID and dying, treating other people, and that just seemed like a travesty. Yeah. And on behalf of the nation, what they wanted to do was give something as a memento from the nation to remember the lost family member. Yes. And they worked with a sculptress down in Bristol, and they produced this beautiful statuette of like an angel sort of with a bowed head, and they wanted to get them made. They got on breakfast TV, and it was James and Paul Gilly were talking to Steve Brown about making something to promote it. And Steve Brown was the one who said, well, I'll get my contacts together. And Steve had worked with George Michael and Elton John, and he knew everybody. Steve tragically died around New Year's on 2021 by just a domestic accident at home, which was a massive tragedy. It was awful. But it was his widow who contacted Ian and said, look, Steve really wanted to make this happen. Can you pick up the reins here and run with it and make it happen? And that's when Ian called me up and said, look, this is going to be even bigger, because Steve had been talking to some of these other people. So he had been talking, I think, to Tony Hadley, and he'd been talking to Marcy, people like that. So now it was a case of, they all knew what had happened to Steve. And then Ian introduced me to all of those guys and said, right, look, Paul's going to produce this now because, Steve's family have asked us to get involved and make it happen. And that's how that came about. And that obviously, the version there was because this was going to be called Angels of the Nation, then it was obvious that the track to do was Angels by Robbie Williams, which incidentally wasn't it hadn't been a hit in the US. So Marcy actually didn't know that track terribly well. Right. And if you hear the version that we did, Marcy and Tony have sung it their way. Some of the phrasing is not directly copying what Robbie did. It's a sort of it's a version of it, but it's a terrific recording. It sounds it does sound really nice. But there was some fun.
But I think that's good because it throws their own spin on it.
Of course, of course,
yeah.
But that whole recording was a lot of fun. And there was some, just some. I mean, trying to get people to come and help in these things is some are more willing than others. Some have got more time than others. Some people have, how should we say? Some people are completely ego free and just get on and do it. There's other people in the rock and roll fraternity that are for various reasons. I won't say too much, but you've got, this is a balancing act to do, and Ian's brilliant at that, and how knowing who to speak to and how to do it, etc., etc. But we had some issues that we had some issues with that one. But there were silly little things like when we did it originally, we had we thought that we might be able to do a sort of a Live Aid or a Band Aid type thing where we could get like 15 singers to sing it and all sing a different bit. Well, in the end, because of availability, we ended up, Marcy was the sort of lead singer. Yeah. And she didn't realize at the beginning that was going to be the case. I mean, she nailed it, did a brilliant job. But when I sent her the first backing track, it was in a certain key, and she wasn't able to do it in that key.
And she thought there were going to be a whole bunch of others involved as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we had to re-record part of it to make it in her key, and then it was amazing.
But it obviously, she was happy with it because she came back and and did Think Loud.
Yeah,
So
100%.
that, I mean, even with Think Loud, yes, it was Kindred Spirit, but then, you had Marcy coming back, and then you also then had, the incredible Leo Sayer jump on
Yeah.
and just give just a life to it that is infectious.
That was an absolute gift at the end, because how you spin these things out, depending on whether you've got a star or not, and what happened with that one. Think Loud was the therapy that Ian had been doing for quite a number of years now, and I'd worked with him on some of that. He'd speak and he'd have these signs up around him saying "Think Loud," and the idea was to slow your speech down. For him, in his head, it would feel like he was shouting just to come across as normal. So I was aware of the therapy, and he and I, he'd come up with the idea, and he said, look, we could do a Think Loud song, and he had an idea of it being some sort of poppy little thing. And to be fair, with various things happening, I personally didn't get to it in as timely a manner as I should have. I had an idea some months ago for what the a chorus might look like, which doesn't take a genius, but there's a little bit of rhyming for the chorus. But Ian then went ahead and actually wrote almost like a prose poetic style. He had some stuff to say in it. And so Josh Phillips and I got together at Josh's place, and in an afternoon, we basically, nailed the basis of a tune, and we put Ian's poetry lyrics into, verses that rhymed and all of that, and it worked brilliantly. It worked really well. We sent Ian a little demo of it that we recorded on our phones, and apparently, it did result in Ian becoming quite emotional about it, which was great. So it was like, right, let's get started.
Yeah.
So we then, the next week, we went to Josh's studio and we put down the drum backing track and all of that. And then it was a case of, right, who can we get to do what, Stuart Elliott came forward to do drums, which was brilliant. Now, we were lucky because he had his drum kit set up and it was ready to record, because he was rehearsing to go on tour. So if we'd have done it 2 weeks later, he wouldn't have been available. So he did that.
And for those who don't know who Stuart Elliott is, I mean, we're talking, the drummer behind what has now become one of the biggest songs, again, of all time, and that's Running Up the Hill. Kate Bush. I mean,
Kate Bush.
This guy has been right there, with all of Kate Bush's material.
Well, he was in Cockney Rebel originally, and you may or not, one of my favourite tunes, because I used to do it in my school band, was Come Up and See Me, Make Me Smile. So he's in Cockney Rebel, he's on that. And then, as you say, like a lot of good drummers of his era, and there's a lot of people that Stuart counts as friends and people that he knows, and some of the same guys I know. And a lot of those drummers have gone on to do great session work, and he's one of those. And he's got, if you look at Stuart's website, I mean, he's a who's who of the pop charts from the 70s and 80s of people he's played with. But as you say, to be able to say, I'm on that is pretty cool. So Stuart, he came forward, did the drums. John Ilsley from Dire Straits came forward because he didn't take too much persuading, because he had a sister that suffers from Parkinson's. So he got it. And he did that. But we didn't have anybody to sing it. We couldn't find a vocalist. Marcy said she didn't want to sing it as a lead vocal because it wasn't quite right for her. We ran it past a number of different people who could, or we were trying to think who could or couldn't do it. JK from Jamiroquai, we approached him. He loved the tune, but he just couldn't do it. We spoke to Paul Carrack, was another one. And again, he liked it, but he couldn't do anything. And it was just we were really trying to find somebody to do it. And in the end, we said I'd sung a vocal on it, right? Now, and I'm not a bad singer. The point was I wasn't famous, and then I started to play it down with Ian, and I said, look, it's not about who's singing it; it's about the cause, right? Yes. Let's not focus on who's on the record. It's the track, and it's about you, and it's about Think Loud therapy. That's what this is about. Yes. And then out of nowhere, Josh said, I wonder if I get hold of Leo. I've worked with Leo. Let me ask Leo. And because Leo jumped at it, and then it was like, that's manna from heaven. Yeah. Because not only did he want to do it, and as you know now, he's committed massively to it. He nailed the vocal. Yeah. He made no qualms about doing it. He didn't come back once and say, oh, well, can you send it to me like, in a different key? None of that. He just nailed it, videoed it all in one day, and he's got behind it. And I mean, I was particularly delighted because I was a big fan of his when I was, younger. I was a big fan. He's a great guy, great singer.
And a massive professional person as well. I mean, the consummate professional. He steps in, he does it, and it's never a problem, like you said. And everything that he does is just the best that he can do.
100%. But there are there are differences between people who you would count as being, pop stars and true, rock and roll legends. So, Leo, I can't say enough good things about the guy, and not just because of the fact that he actually said that he loved my guitar playing on the track, which I was really happy about. So Leo tells me I'm a good guitar player. I'll go with that. But no, you're right. He's a total pro. Yeah. He's a total pro. Yeah. And there are people that in the rock and roll business that can get together and play and just make something happen. And there's others that have to do it in a studio with a producer, because if they got caught out without their producer singing in the studio, you'd realize they couldn't sing properly. Yeah. There are pop stars in the world like that.
But the other thing in talking about not just being professional as an aging pop star, but in comparison to, or rock star compared to, say, the pop and singers of today, and I've done a lot of interviews, I can honestly say that every interview that I have done they have just been so welcoming and so warm in that conversation, and I think it has a lot to do with the era that they were brought up in, that their music came from.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. There's a certain humility.
Yeah,
and I think it, as you quite rightly say, Shane, it comes from, some of the people that I know in music. There's some proper stars, and I'm privileged to count many of these people as friends of mine, which is amazing. And I've played with a number of them, and I played the working men's clubs in the UK to try, when you're trying to get up, and all of these people have done the same thing. Everybody worked, and some of the differences, some got breaks, some didn't. Yeah. Some were outstandingly gifted in terms of their ability, and certainly some of the songwriting is a big thing. But the fact is, everybody in that era pretty much started in the same place. So if you talk to Leo, you talk to Marcy, you talk to some of these other people we spoke about, they've all been used to getting in a car, driving somewhere, doing a gig,
playing in the pub.
If they were, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger for them, and they got discovered. I think Leo was discovered by Adam Faith, or certainly he was his manager in the early days. But you still have to go and do it. You have to deliver. You've got to keep performing. You've got to get on the road. You've got to sell records. And as you said, all of this, the PR part of them is that's what they grew up learning how to do. Which is, I think that's why you find what you're finding with some of these proper legends, as we might say. Nice people. Yeah,
no, I completely agree with you on that. And we had a chat with Leo and Ian, and again. Leo was so attached to the project, and it was inspiring to hear his words towards Ian, and that's actually in the previous episode to this. You'll be able to have a listen to that, and I think that goes a long way from Ian's perspective as well. And I don't believe that the project is nearing its end. I think that this project is just beginning. The Think Loud project.
I hope so. I mean, I'm very proud of what we've managed to produce, because it's quite a catchy little tune. It's not a bad little tune. And Josh and I have only started sort of writing together or toyed with it since 2021. And we get on really well. We're really good mates. We're the same age. We got the same sense of humor. So for whatever reason, I find it really easy to write with him. So when we get together, we can come up with stuff quite quickly, which is what we managed to do, which was great. So I'm proud of that. I'm very proud of Ian for writing the lyrics, because it really tells the story of what that's about. If you listen to the lyrics to the song, there's certain things on there where he makes reference to John Coleman, who's a massive inspiration in this whole field of Parkinson's, because he's actually he's managed to reverse the symptoms. He's reversed his PD, which is amazing, and he's written a book on it, which is mentioned in the lyrics of the song. So there's, it means an awful lot to me personally to have Ian as one of my friends, to be able to be involved, and for him to trust me to get on with it, to do it with Josh, and then for us to produce something and that we're proud of. And people you play it to, they go, oh yeah, this is really good, it should be a hit. Well, yeah, of course, maybe everybody think making it a hit is tough. That's the hard part. That's the really hard part. And I do have younger mates who are at the forefront of the rock and roll industry in London, who work for some of the big labels like Universal and Warner's and all of that. And, they do control what goes on in those spaces. But it's so tough. You can't, it's really, really difficult to get exposure. So the very fact that we've got people like Leo, who's really committed himself to it, and he's flown the flag, and guys like yourself. I mean, you've been an amazing help in this, in publicizing what it is we're trying to do here. But I'd love to think that you're right with regards to the longevity. It's just the beginning part of it. Because Parkinson's itself is, until there's a cure, then we have to keep going. We just got to keep going. And I think that's part of where Leo was coming from, and we've all been touched in one way or another by it. So I hope you're right there.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, no, and I'm the same. I have known people with Parkinson's disease. I can, honestly say that it hasn't affected me or my family, which is fantastic. But seeing and gaining the inspiration from Ian, it's really made me go, I want to get involved. I want to see what I can do to help. And I think everything that everyone has been doing in this project has just been phenomenal. So,
well, as I said, I think I'm very thankful that you've latched onto it, and that's what it takes. It takes people that go, I get this, and I'm going to get involved. And that's exactly what happened with Leo. That's what happened with the people that we've had to date. I'm just thankful in the whole project that we didn't manage to get anybody like Eric Clapton to get involved, because otherwise I wouldn't be playing the guitar on it.
There's always time.
I wouldn't have got the guitar gig.
But now you can actually do a duet with Eric Clapton. How amazing would that be?
If Eric was to step up, if he's listening. Funnily enough, where I live, when I moved down to where I live now in Hythe in Kent, down on the coast, about 10 years ago. And it's a very interesting little area, because Hythe is a bit, it's quite secluded. It's right by the seaside. The beach is like 100 yards from my door. But it's not like some seaside resorts. It's not full of kiss me quick hats and postcard stalls and hot dog stands. It's not like that. It's very, very calm and cool. And as a result, it's a little bit of a jewel on this part of the South Kent coast. And a lot of people over the years have sort of moved down here and retired down here. So my very first night in the pub, some of the people there that I met, John Etchells has become a really good mate of mine. John Etchells was a sound engineer who'd worked with Spandau Ballet, who'd worked with David Gilmour and Pink Floyd and Queen, and he knew Freddie. He's got loads of stories. So I've done a lot of work with him, with John. He's local. And then there's a guy called locally who was Eric Clapton's chiropractor.
There's an in.
And totally there's an in. And actually, I had my 50th birthday down here. It'll be 10 years ago in January. And we did a gig at the British Legion, because it's got a big bar and it had a big stage. So we had loads of musicians came down and played, which was great fun. And he was threatening, this guy David, who's his chiropractor, was threatening to get Eric to come down. He said he might, and I was like, you're joking. Anyway, we were waiting. In the end, he didn't, but he did come up. He did bring me a set of Eric Clapton strings that Eric had signed and wished happy birthday on, which is is pretty cool. So he got close. We've talked about trying to get Eric. We have played that card with David up to now to reach out to Eric, but it's one of those things. It's like Paul McCartney doesn't live too far away either.
See,
he's one of my He's one of my celebrity impersonations that I do actually as McCartney. So the conversation would have been something along the lines of, well, we're doing this thing with Leo, could you come and play the guitar? And he would have said, well, I'd love to come and do it, but I've heard that Paul Mitchell's already put the guitar down. So, I don't think I'm needed anymore. I don't think I'd love to do it, but I'm not going to step on Paul's toes, But,
well done. That was good. Well done.
We did think about just going and knocking on his door because he's down at Peasmarsh. Yeah. He's not too far away. But still, there you go.
Fantastic. Well, look, we're going to play that song. This is Think Loud. And, Paul Mitchell, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
It's been a pleasure. Pleasure, Shane.
And we will put the link for you to go and donate. So definitely jump on and donate for this one. It's a very worthy cause, of course, for helping bring awareness to Parkinson's disease. So, yeah. Paul Mitchell, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Shane.
Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Long Way to the Top. Hit plus or follow to subscribe to the podcast and head over to Facebook at the Long Way to the Top podcast and give us a like. Keep on rocking and I'll catch you on the next episode of Long Way to the Top.